We're just allowing folks to trickle in at the moment. We'll get started in about
All right, so we are going to get started here, and as folks trickle in, we'll just let them in. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to Beyond the Ballot, the role of religion within the American political landscape. My name is Mackenzie Paust, and I am the Interreligious Dialogue Research Coordinator for the Khatib program in Religion and Dialogue, located at the University of Mary Washington. Tonight's event, as with all of the work done by the Khatib program, would not be possible without the generosity of our benefactors, Dr. Reza Khatib and Mrs. Georgiana Clifford Khatib. We thank them for their continued support. And we also thank our program's director, Dr. Mehdi Amin-Razavi, Professor of Philosophy and Religion at UMW. He's here with us this evening, and we thank him for his work and leadership. For more information about our program, please visit our website. It can be found by searching Khatib Program in Religion and Dialogue on UMW's website, umw.edu. Dr. and Mrs. Khatib believe that it is only through mutual understanding and respect for each other's religions that tolerance and peaceful coexistence is possible. They are dedicated to supporting endeavors like tonight's event that expose and encourage the scholarly study of religions in order to offset hateful agendas and misinformation. We remind you that this is a space for everyone and a space for learning. We thank you for taking the time to join us. We will have a Q&A section of our program at the end of the evening. All questions should be put in the chat section of the Zoom event, and make sure that it is going to everyone. And we will source the questions from there. Our event is being recorded and should hopefully be uploaded with closed captions or an accompanying transcript in the coming weeks. Tonight promises a meaningful and timely conversation on how the United States' various religious traditions influence politics and our political choices well beyond the ballot. Please join me in welcoming our moderator for this evening, Dr. Jennifer Berry, Associate Professor of Religious Studies at UMW. Dr. Berry received her BA from Colorado Christian University, her Master of Theological Studies from Duke Divinity School, and a PhD in Historical Studies from Drew University, focusing in late antiquity, early Christianity, and women's studies. Dr. Berry's research includes late antiquity, clerical exile, heresiology, and gender violence in early Christianity. Her most recent work is Bishops in Flight, Exile, and Displacement in Late Antiquity. Thank you again to all of you for joining us, and please enjoy. And I pass the virtual floor over to Dr. Berry.
Thank you, Mackenzie. I really appreciate all your work on this. Mackenzie has been kind of the behind the scenes networker and is largely responsible for this event tonight. So we really thank her for her hard work. And I also wanted to welcome everybody. We are, as you may have figured it out now, having a panel discussion called Beyond the Ballot, the Role of Religion Within American Political Landscape, which is presented by the Khatib Program for Religion and Dialogue. I'm, as Mackenzie said, Dr. Berry, Associate Professor of Religious Studies, and I'll be this evening's moderator. Hopefully my internet isn't too choppy. We've had a few issues, but I will do my best to at least guide people in the right direction as a moderator. But fortunately, I will not be doing too much talking. I am an ancient historian, and so unless our politics bleed back into the 4th and 5th century, my expertise is very limited. So I'm relying on our panelists to really kind of guide us through our conversation tonight. So I'm joined by my esteemed colleagues, Dr. Nichole Flores at the University of Virginia, Dr. John Fea of Messiah University, and Dr. Emile Lester, my colleague here at the University of Mary, Washington, serving as our respondent tonight. I want to say thank you to each one of you for taking the time to join us. And I want to give you a little bit more introduction to each of our panelists so you know where their expertise lies, as well as the important contribution that they are providing to us already as they are fully immersed in this current kind of political heightened moment that we are in. So Dr. Nichole Flores is currently the Assistant Professor of Religious Studies at the University of Mary, Virginia, just around the corner in Charlottesville. Holds a BA or an AD from Smith College, a Master's Divinity from the Yale Divinity School, and her PhD is in Theological Ethics from Boston College. Dr. Flores' research is on constructive contributions of Catholic and Latinx theologies with notions of justice and aesthetics to the life of democracy. Her research in practical ethics addresses issues of democracy, migration, gender, and race and ethnicity. And her forthcoming monograph should be out in the spring. She is also a major contributor to traditional academic publications, highly respected journals, but is also a public scholar as well, and contributes to several outlets within, such as the Commonweal magazine, and I think it's the Jesuit Review.
America, yes.
American Jesuit Review, that's right. So she has not only depths of knowledge and expertise, but is more than capable of reaching a broader audience. And so we welcome her voice this evening. Our second panelist is John Fea, who is the Distinguished Professor of American History at Messiah University. His teaching and scholarly interests center on early American history, American religious history, and the history of religion and politics. Dr. Fea has a Master's of Divinity as well from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, and his PhD is from Stony Brook University. Dr. Fea is an author of several works and traditional monographs. He is well published, very prolific writer, and he is heavily invested in kind of our current political landscape. His recent work, which is on, I believe it's, you have so many publications. Let's see, the introduction, historical introduction and Believe Me, the Evangelical Road to Donald Trump, and his blog, which is, I found earlier today, Can you remind me what the website is? So
Yeah,
that,
sure. ThewayofImprovement.com. It's
yeah,
called The Way of Improvement Leads Home, the blog.
great.
Yeah. We
Which
could
is,
have a whole other session on what that means, but we'll do.
but has even a post as recent as today, kind of commenting on what's going on in our intense moment. And last but not least, of course, is my colleague, Emile, who is Professor of Political Science at the University of Mary Washington. Dr. Lester received his BA from George Washington University, a master's in science from the London School of Economics, and a PhD from the University of Virginia. And Dr. Lester's research interests include political philosophy, religion and politics, the presidency, American history. He is also a strong advocate for religious literacy, and was the recipient of a research grant from the Religious Freedom Center of the Museum for some of those kind of projects. He's well established in the American Academy of Religion for kind of putting forward these initiatives, and has contributed greatly to not only the Mary Washington community, but across our nation. So we welcome everybody. And before we get started, I want to reiterate some of the points that Mackenzie made previously. Tonight will be divided into kind of two parts. The first will involve myself asking kind of the introductory questions to Drs. Flores and Fea to get us going, and then Dr. Lester will offer some responses. But the event, however, is largely organic and meant to kind of foster an open dialogue. And so we are by no means restricted to the questions that I provide. The second part will be audience participation, and that's where you folks will ask the questions in the chat box, and Mackenzie and I will both kind of pay attention and kind of pick up on some of those questions and try to insert them at a later point in our conversation. Okay, so if you have any questions, please sure to either reach out to Mackenzie or myself in a private chat. Otherwise, we will be on the lookout. Okay, so to kick us off, I did circulate some questions beforehand to our panelists to help them kind of orient themselves. So we'll begin there and then see where this conversation takes us. And the first question I'd like to kind of throw out there is this looming question, and it will help us kind of contextualize maybe some of the larger issues at play, is how has religion played a role in American politics or presidential politics at various points in American history? And what voices have had a presence in the past? And what new voices are we hearing from more recently? So either of our panelists are welcome to contribute, but if somebody has something they're just itching to say, then please, by all means.
Go ahead, Nicole, you want to start us? Or?
Sure, I can go first. Thank you so much for that kind and helpful introduction, Dr. Berry. So my work is concentrated in Catholicism, and I am interested in both Christianity and religion in general, well beyond Catholicism, but my center of gravity in my own studies and expertise is there. And for me, obviously, this election is very exciting because it's, we have I believe our third Catholic candidate for the presidency of the United States. Of course, the first was John F. Kennedy. The second was John Kerry, and I was your age, or just a little bit older than most of you listening today, when John Kerry was defeated in his bid for the presidency, which is a little bit disturbing to me as someone who's still a young scholar that I was your age when that happened. And then of course we have Joseph Biden. And one of the very interesting things for me in this election cycle has been to see kind of there's a lot of points of overlap between Kennedy and Biden in particular, but some important points of contrast. So in terms of their overlap, I've been very interested in the accent that both place on character. And it just so happens that one of my students at UVA is a member of the Kennedy clan. He's a Shriver. And so I've gotten to know the family a little bit through my student, Tim Shriver. And as it turns out, this concept of character is just really central to it wasn't just central to JFK, but it's central to who this family is and continues to be in a very important way. And watching the Kennedys recognize that in Joe Biden and just get so excited and so invested, really. And I think from the perspectives of politics, looking back and seeing the level to which the Kennedys and the Shrivers have kind of given their imprimatur of Catholic politics to Biden is really interesting. But in terms of contrast, whereas Kennedy really went out of his way to say, I'm not going to be controlled by the Pope or any bishop. He has his famous address in Houston to the Baptist Ministerial Association. I know I'm getting it wrong. I'm tired. And I respect historians enough to know that they do something very different than what I do as an ethicist. So historians, I love you all. So he was trying to make that distinction and create some distance between himself and kind of magisterial authority, whereas not only Joe Biden, but also in certain ways Donald Trump, they're trying to show how they are going to be governed in certain respects by religious beliefs, ideas, communities, leaders, that they see them as authoritative in maybe not like, this person's going to dictate my policy, but at the same time, I don't know if any of you caught Joe Biden's really powerful speech yesterday. He was quoting Pope Francis directly, so that's very different strategy than John F. Kennedy. And I think that we need to take note of that. I think it shows definitely where we are in this election, but I think in a broader historical perspective, it shows a shift in where we are placing our emphasis as a public on the role of religion in public life. And that's something we need to attend to.
Yeah, that's a great point, Nichole. I've thought about that too. The difference between, Kennedy having to sort of hide not necessarily hide, but, shun his Catholicism. I'm an American, right? Yeah. And then, John Kerry just kind of, and Biden, right, making the case that my Catholicism is why you should vote for me. I believe in morals and values and these kinds of things. I've been fascinated by that same thing as well. I mostly study the evangelicals, and evangelicals have been around since the time of the start of the Republic. So, you can think of all kinds of examples in which religion, especially brought into the fold by evangelicals, have played a significant role in elections. My favorite one is, any Hamilton fans out there, show or movie, right? The election of 1800. By the way, the election, I have to say this wherever I go, the election of 1800 in that song in the Hamilton play and video is the worst historical. It's so bad. The play is great, right? I mean, there's a lot of really good stuff in there that you can even use in class, but not the election of 1800. Anyway, but religion played a significant role in that election. And Thomas Jefferson was a person who was not a traditional, Christian. He rejected the resurrection of Jesus Christ. He wrote his own Bible in which he cut out all of the supernatural parts of it. He didn't believe in the Trinity. And there was this great fear among a largely kind of white evangelical Protestant nation, which was embodied by the Federalists, right? Those Hamiltonians, that, we're a Christian nation, right? How could we have an infidel, right? Was the word they used, running a Christian nation. And one of the things I love as a historian, I should say, about the event was you know, some of this, you hear some of the same rhetoric, right? You know, all these New England and New York evangelicals saying, you know, if Jefferson gets elected, he's going to come for our Bibles. He's going to close our churches down, right? You know, I don't think anyone ever said, you know, he will remove God from, you know, from life or whatever, which in my tradition, that's Christian tradition, that's kind of theologically impossible. But you get the point, right? I mean, it's the same kind of fear, I think, and religion is often connected with that fear. You know, you could think of other elections too. I mean, Professor Flores mentioned 1960 or 1960, which is a big one. One other Catholic candidate, Nichole, Al Smith, 1928. Yeah,
yes,
yeah, Irish Catholic who lost to Herbert Hoover, right?
yes.
And that was like, I think, the first time. Although I think Kennedy, it was much bigger issue with Kennedy than it was. It was with Al Smith. And then you have, you know, after say 1976 or 1980, you know, this idea of religion becomes a really dominant theme with the emergence of a Christian right in America, which kind of views much of politics through the lens of religion, right? You know, I mean, the Christian right is a political movement, right? It's not necessarily a spiritual or religious movement, but it is a movement that is trying to kind of reclaim, or, you know, America, quote unquote, reclaim. I'm not sure there's much there to reclaim, but renew or restore America to a Christian nation. So, you know, from Reagan forward, you know, religion plays a vital role in practically every, every election up until, you know, our current moment. I think that all started too in 1976, where, you know, you have Jimmy Carter, a born again Christian, as he defined himself, running against Gerald Ford, who himself was kind of, you know, pretty devout too. He was, you know, I don't know if you'd call him an evangelical or not, but you know, the Christian right departing or leaving Carter in 1980 because he didn't deliver on certain things like, you know, abortion or one of the big issues with Carter was he supported a Supreme Court decision associated with this conservative fundamentalist college, Bob Jones University, right, that said you have to, if you don't desegregate your schools in the South, you'll lose your tax exempt status. And, you know, many white evangelical Christians said, how dare you come in here, big government, right, and tell us that we have to, tell us how to live our lives, right? In other words, how dare the government come in and tell us to desegregate, right? We have this biblical mandate to, you know, we believe the races should be separate, was their argument. And Carter supported the Supreme Court decision, right, which disappointed a lot of these Southern white evangelicals, and they turned against him in 1980. So, you know, I think religion from this point forward, I don't see it going away anymore when we talk about these elections.
Well, and for an ethical perspective, the way we kind of take the question as ethicists is not asking, you know, the more descriptive whether religion is involved in public life or in presidential politics, but, you know, from the ethical perspective, it would be how ought it be involved, or, you know, so I think because of, you know, this rich history of its involvement, that this question is not a straightforward one for ethicists at all.
And, you know, I stress the Christian right, but I mean, I think Barack Obama was one of the most outspoken, kind of thoughtful religious presidents that we have. I mean, I wrote a piece back when he first got elected, and you know, it was a sort of a playful piece online in which I listed all of these things that Barack Obama said without saying it was Barack Obama. You know, he's like quoting C.S. Lewis, he's quoting the Bible, you know, and then I said, who is this? Right. And, you know, any kind of conservative evangelical would have read it and said, oh, it's got to be, you know, Ronald Reagan or George W. Bush. But it was Obama. And then, like, I went to unpack the piece, and I took a lot of heat for that because I suggested that Barack Obama may have been the most biblically literate president we've ever had. And this is from someone who's written a book about the founding fathers and religion, and they hardly even mention, biblical verses and so forth, right? But it seems like it's always coming out of Obama's mouth. So it's, it gets to that ethical question, right? How religion is used, right? It's not just by conservatives to sort of reclaim America, but also in terms of some kind of justice or social project or something to that degree.
Absolutely.
Yeah, first of all, Dr. Flores, I'd like to say that I'm also, you said that you're older than you want to be. I am way older than I want to be, so I can sympathize. I'm very jealous that you talked about the Biden and Kennedy analogy. I think that's fascinating, and I'm sort of smacking my head over here. I just finished writing a book about the American presidency that talks about Kennedy. And I would just throw in, I think your answer is wonderful. And I would just throw in 2 additional connections between Biden and Kennedy, which I think are significant. The first one is that I think that they're both institutionalists. They're both believers in the importance of maintaining institutions. And you would be much more the expert than I would on this, but I wonder whether that traces back to their experience with Catholicism and growing up in the Catholic Church. So I think that's an interesting possible connection. The other really interesting connection here is that they both have compassion for the underprivileged, and they both have compassion for outsiders. And I think particularly for Kennedy, and this is Arthur Schlesinger writes this wonderful biography of Kennedy, 1,000 Days, and he talks about how Kennedy, growing up as an outsider, as a Catholic, had a profound impact on his politics. And you certainly see that in Kennedy's politics. I think you can see that in Biden's politics as well. Dr. Barry's wonderful question talked about the past, and John, Dr. Fea, I'm not going to try to compete with you in terms of American history. I would call attention to the present and also the future, and I particularly spotlight the importance of the 1965 Immigration Act. Yes. And how it fundamentally changed the religious landscape. And I think this election, maybe more than any other so far, really emphasizes the importance of that. Part of that is bringing in Latino Catholics, and Dr. Flores, that's obviously your specialty, so I'm not going to say much about that. But I would also talk about the small but growing number of people who are not Christians, so Hindus, Muslims, and Buddhists. Mackenzie, maybe you can set up sort of a prize in the chat section, but I'll give you guys, I'm going to answer it. I'll give you guys a quiz. The largest Hindu temple outside of the Indian subcontinent is actually in New Jersey, okay? The second largest Hindu temple outside the Indian subcontinent is in the suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia. So when we think about this election, it's in Gwinnett County. So when we think about this election, Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists overall constitute 2 to 4% of the American population, which doesn't seem huge. But if we think about swing states and swing districts, there are significant Muslim populations in Georgia, Texas, and Florida. There are significant Hindu populations in Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. And those folks might have quite an important impact on the election next Tuesday. And what's interesting too is that these groups are growing. The religiously unaffiliated, I know Dr. Barry has another question about this, so I'm not going to talk about this too much now. The religious unaffiliated are growing. White evangelicals, as Dr. Fea well knows, are dramatically declining. In 2018, what was it? The Southern Baptists had the fewest number of baptisms in the last 7 years since World War II. So these, the more diverse groups are getting larger, whereas the white evangelicals are growing smaller.
I think another way in which those post 1965 Hart-Celler Act, Immigration Act, immigrants, children now, their children, right, are shaping it, is they're creating demographic diversity and religious diversity in the country, which is then inciting, white evangelicals are still about 20%, 19-20% of the voting population. They're inciting fear among white evangelicals about the very decline of their Christian, their white Protestant, white Christian nation, right? So they maybe even force many conservative white evangelicals to the polls out of fear that you know, all of these new religions are you know, so it's a motivator. You know, again, we could get the ethicists to tell us whether it's a good motivator or not. I don't think it is, right? But you know, as a historian, you know, it's motivating people to vote, actually. Yeah.
I mean, Christian Smith has this book back in 2000 based on a survey of evangelicals, which I think is a wonderful book. It's what evangelicals want. And for him back then, what he found in his surveys and his interviews was that when evangelicals talked about a Christian nation, they were primarily, they primarily meant that America was founded as a Christian nation, not that it needed to be a Christian nation today. But I wonder if he were to do the same sort of survey today, 20 years on, with more diversity, just like Dr. Fea talked about, whether he'd find that evangelicals are much more concerned about the importance of America being a Christian nation today, as opposed to just as opposed to just in the past.
Mm-hmm. Very quickly, I love that you bring up institutionalism, because there's been more than a couple of people thinking about this, not necessarily, you know, in think pieces about the presidency, but about the Supreme Court, because a question that's out there has been, how do we end up with this, you know, now large majority of Catholics on the Supreme Court, when really a lot of the fighting for the Supreme, you know, for conservative justices on the Supreme Court, the movement has, you know, the Catholics have been involved, but it has largely been led by white evangelicals fighting for the court. But a part of the responses that are emerging, I think there's a lot of good work left to do on this, both in relation to the courts and to the presidency, is this not only the religious and liturgical structures of Catholicism that lend themselves to that. I mean, we have our own law. We literally have a canon law, and there's canon lawyers, but also the institutional structures of Catholic universities, and how deeply rooted the study of law is in a lot of these institutions. You think not just the University of Notre Dame, but Boston College, other Catholic universities, Catholic University of America, and these, you know, they're not monolithic at all, which is very interesting. And this is why, even though I think the conservative Catholic justices kind of get the most attention in terms of the religious contours of the courts, we should not neglect Sonia Sotomayor, who is also Catholic, although she didn't attend any of these Catholic institutions for her own training, but comes with this similar sensibility of the importance of institutions. And, you know, she's been painted, I think, in, you know, some public rhetoric as this radical liberal, but, you know, she comes onto the court as a moderate institutionalist who has, you know, often ruled in that case. So I just love that you brought up that point, and especially because it's so timely right now. A lot of people are thinking about Catholics in relation to institutions, and that parallel that we see both in the, you know, within the practices of Catholicism, but also in Catholic social thought, you know, all the way back to John Courtney Murray, who was, you know, also just a firm believer in the Constitution as a document that gives moral meaning as much as it does legal meaning.
And then you have the white event. There was a great piece I saw somewhere where, I can't remember, it's just really recent, about the way white evangelicals are out. The word was outsourcing, the author used, outsourcing their Supreme Court decisions to Catholics, right? Yeah. Which raises this huge question about evangelicals, kind of their anti-institutionalism, and their, you know, I'll speak to my own tribe here, as someone who still identifies as an evangelical, sort of their anti-intellectualism, right? And their why isn't there an evangelical candidate for the Supreme Court? I think that's something we need to dig into a lot more deeply, and it could get in. I think it gets right into what you're saying, Nichole, about the you know, the commitment to the study of law within the Catholic tradition, the Catholic intellectual tradition, faith and reason, you know, all these kinds of things that evangelicals just don't have, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm married to an evangelical, so I want to defend a little bit. Have not to the same extent.
To the same extent, thank you.
To the
Well,
same
you're
extent.
talking to one here too, so I got invited. I guess I'm smart enough to do this event, right?
Well, I just wonder whether, I mean, certainly part of the explanation, I think, goes back to James Davidson Hunter and talking about the culture war. And John, this goes back to an issue you brought up. I mean, traditionally, of course, there's tremendous hostility between Protestant towards Catholics, and then this goes all the way up until 1960s. And then what we have over the last 40, 50 years is this coalition of white Catholics, this convergence of white Catholics and evangelicals. So I think that certainly it's not surprising that you would find white Catholics on the court who are representing positions which are very much associated with white evangelicals. I also wonder, you folks could push back against me, whether the reason, in addition to the wonderful reasons that Nichole and John, you talk about, the reason why you have more Catholics on the court is that maybe it's more acceptable for presidents, and particularly Republican presidents, to appoint Catholics, that it might be an easier sell as opposed to just selling, just trying to sell straight out evangelicals. Who was it? Michael McConnell, for instance, was rumored to be up for quite a while. Correct me if I'm wrong, strongly identifies as evangelical or Catholic?
I think he, that's a good question. I've always I don't know what his actual faith tradition is, but I've always saw him as a evangelical friendly kind of person. I don't know where
It's interesting that he didn't get one of those seats. I mean, he was on he was on that short list, for pretty much, for every Bush nomination, for instance. And, I'm
not sure I completely buy into the idea that it's easier to get a Catholic if you're appealing to, evangelicals. I just don't think there's a lot of evangelicals out there. And there are plenty of conservative Catholics, originalist Catholics, disciples of Antonin Scalia, I don't know. Good question.
Let me just interject here, since when we're kind of linking different bodies to different religious traditions, specifically public officials, right? That lead us into kind of the second question that we had kind of percolating in the background, is that while the US Constitution specifically prohibits a religious test for public office, I mean, this is in Article 6, there seems to be, and as you guys are pointing us in that direction, there seems to be some sort of de facto religious test put in place for public officials. Like, you cannot run without at least having some sort of claim here. Do you see that happening more and more in these different kind of positions, whether it be the president's position, whether it be running, being appointed a Supreme Court justice? Religion seems to be a big ticket issue for credibility.
Yeah, I have been troubled by this because when I read this question, I was jotting down notes and I answered yes and no. And a part of this is I've been fascinated by the, in the spring, I was fascinated by the breadth of religious commitments among Democrats participating in the primary. And while Joe Biden emerged victorious, I think that there are other scenarios that we could imagine where someone else might have, and a great number of those candidates, of course, Pete Buttigieg comes to mind for as someone with a particularly well-pronounced theological awareness and a public voice on these issues. It was also a possibility for Bernie Sanders, self-professed secular Jew, to emerge from that field, and that would have been the more desirable outcome for at least a substantial part of the Democratic Party. To me, I just think that's a really important point to carry forward from whatever happens next week. Of course, that will be the thing we remember. But these moments of our of kind of sorting out, at least on the Democratic side, the place of religion in relation to the platform has been fascinating. But I'm also really interested in what the future holds for Catholic Democrats. I think Joe Biden, of course, as someone who's been in public life for longer than I've been alive, which also, you know, that should make Joe feel old. But
47 years and he's done nothing. Nothing for 47 years.
But I think that kind of boomer Catholics, for lack of a better terminology, get a pass on not having clear answers or clearly stated pro-choice or pro-abortion positions, whereas younger Catholic candidates don't quite have that same leeway. There's different expectations. So Biden's going to get a little bit more of a pass for, flip-flops on life issues, whereas younger Catholics won't. And I'm not sure where a younger Catholic who, like someone like Connor Lamb, so someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who, I don't know where her personal belief is, but she's very clearly in line with the Democratic Party on the issue of abortion. Connor Lamb is not, and I'm not sure exactly how Connor Lamb breaks through nationally. So I guess what I'm arguing here is that I'm not sure, at least among Democrats and among Democratic Catholics, there's a religious test, but there might be other ideological tests that are emerging on the left that are more important than religion, I think. That do concern religious and moral issues, to be sure, but it's different, and of course, different trends are emerging on the right. Perhaps we could think of an analogous issue that would disqualify someone who otherwise, has conservative bona fides from, emerging to, but I don't know what happens to the Republican Party after Donald Trump, whether that's and whether that afterlife happens in a few weeks from now or 4 years from now. I don't know what happens to the party.
Yeah, in terms of the test, right? The unofficial test, religious test. I think that's exactly right. I think there's always been an unofficial religious test until I think maybe, there was something shifted in Democratic politics, I think, in 1992 and it's some obscure example, but I'm from Pennsylvania. So I'm originally from New Jersey, but I've lived in Pennsylvania for a while. So I hear this story all the time, that was the year that Bill Clinton would not allow the governor of Pennsylvania, I think he might have been the former governor by that point, I can't remember, Bob Casey, a pro-life Democrat. His son is now my senator, who's still a pro-life Democrat, although he's a little bit of a different of a pro-life Democrat than the Christian right, So my senator, Bob Casey, voted to support the Hyde Amendment, right, which does not allow funding for abortions. But he would never vote, not that Roe v. Wade is up for a vote, but he would support Roe v. Wade, right? So, but Bill Clinton would not permit Bob Casey to speak about abortion at the Democratic Convention in 1992 because the official platform was pro-choice. And I think that really ticked off people like, say, my parents, right? I grew up working class ethnic. I'm half Italian, half Slovakian, grew up in a Catholic culture of New Jersey. My parents went forward at a Billy Graham crusade when I was 16, right? So I was brought up in that white ethnic working class, also, I'm not saying it was all good either, right? A lot of racism, a lot of this stuff. But I was brought up in that culture. But it was, I grew up Democrat, right? We were all Democrats. My grandfather was a Teamster, so, but we were also like incredibly pro-life, right? But when someone like Casey wasn't allowed to speak at the Democratic Convention, this ticked off my Catholic parents, and they've never looked back, or now evangelical parents, but they've never looked back, right? They've been Republicans from the beginning. Now, again, abortion doesn't always equate perfectly with religion, but usually abortion is debated within a religious kind of context. So I think, again, looking at the history here, I think, let's go all the way back to like 1800 again. Jefferson said he was an infidel, or they accused Jefferson of being an infidel, but Jefferson was able to articulate a vision of religious liberty that attracted all of the poor Methodists and Baptist evangelicals, because they had been persecuted under the Anglican Church, right? They had suffered under these established churches. So Jefferson, despite the fact that he was, irreligious, still there was still this unofficial test, right? He's fighting for us, right? He may not be fighting for those Federalists who want religion and the state to be close together, but he's fighting for, us Baptists who have been, dunked in the river and persecuted and, all these other things. And so I think both Democrats and Republicans, I think until the 80s, 90s, they wanted someone who could at least speak the language of Christianity, whether it was evangelical Christianity or some kind of, Abraham Lincoln-esque kind of, appeals to civil religion, right? Or, reference in the Bible here and there, saying, read Lincoln's second inaugural where he makes these appeals to the Sermon on the Mount. I think today in the Democratic Party, to talk about religion as a political, as a way of attracting voters, I think like when Joe Biden talks about religion, and I could be wrong about this, Nichole, you could correct me, but it almost seems like he's talking about, he doesn't need to talk about religion to talk to the base. Yeah. He talks about religion to get independent voters, right? Or he talks about religion to get, evangelicals who just hate Trump, but just can't get themselves to vote for Biden. But yeah, he talks about faith. Maybe that'll make me sleep better at night if I pull the lever for Biden. So, I think that the Democratic Party, if it would have its druthers, is kind of, I think, moving in a very secular direction. And I don't know where sort of a pro-life Democrat like my family's upbringing, or someone who takes faith seriously kind of fits in the future trajectory. I think there's a lot of people like Jim Wallace from the evangelical left and so forth who would like the Democratic Party to be more conversant in religion, but I don't see the trajectory kind of moving in that way. Ocasio-Cortez is interesting. I mean, she identifies Catholic. Yeah. And I just saw an interview with her the other day where she spoke in very kind of, she mentioned like the Holy Spirit in like an interview, I mean, most white evangelicals would freak out if they heard Ocasio-Cortez mention God or the Holy Spirit, right? They think she's the devil incarnate, right? But so yeah, just kind of, that's just some random thoughts about that. Yeah.
John, I'd love to see your experiment that you did with Barack Obama with Alexandria.
Yeah. I'll have to work on that piece, Nichole. I'll give you credit.
Yeah. Well, and it's really fascinating too, because I don't think we've brought in a racial or ethnic, we have brought an ethnic dimension, but a racial dimension to the conversation. Who gets to claim religion, in public life, and despite still, even with increasing numbers of nuns, both nuns, N-O-N-E-S, within both Black and Latinx communities, the communities are still overwhelmingly religious and growing. And in the case of Latinx Christians, not just Catholics, but across the board, Christianity, and even beyond Latinx Muslims, there's plenty of Jews who are Latinx as well, in the United States. And these communities are not experiencing some of the decline in population or birth rates, and are, as we've already mentioned, even more well established in swing state suburbs. It's very interesting, this language of, we need to reclaim the suburbs. I'm sitting in a lovely suburb right now, and I'm surrounded by primarily Black Christians who live near me. And who bring to the table many religious issues, but I think it's a very delicate issue, and perhaps one that we have more time to address and do justice to. But this association between Christianity and whiteness that has been not the only story, but certainly an enduring and pervasive one in United States history that continues to influence how we talk about religious issues. Even that abortion is a dominant issue when there are other extremely weighty moral issues that are that are being dealt with in our national life. Immigration comes to mind as the one that perhaps in a parallel universe would have more attention drawn to it, especially given the way that the inability to reach some sort of better solution on this has affected children in a very direct way, that you could see that some of the aspects that disturb many pro-life people about abortion are also present. Some of the moral aspects are present in questions of immigration right now, and yet it isn't the top top line issue on your Catholic voter guide, at least the popular ones. The bishops are pretty clear that these are all life issues and are of equal weight, but there's this language of, oh well, abortion is a preeminent issue. And actually I love your both of your perspectives on this, but that thinking about abortion as being almost an issue of singular importance, or maybe the first among equals, but a singular importance. To me, it seems that it's perhaps more evangelical than Catholic, and maybe one sign of the convergence in the context of the culture wars of Catholics and evangelicals on that issue.
Yeah, you're forcing me to kind of nuance a little more, Nichole, what I said earlier, right? So when you talk about the future of the Democratic Party, the future of the Democratic Party, the future of America, period, right, is Latinx, it's immigrants, right? So, when we think about the future of religion in the Democratic Party, it's going to look differently, right? And then this whole abortion question, I totally agree that it's got to be woven in. I think the abortion rate in the United States, as some of you may know, has been going down consistently since the Bill Clinton era. And there's a pretty good argument to be made that when you give women, right, health care, you deal with the effects of systemic racism, when you deal with poverty, right, abortion rates are going to go down. So it's not a one or the other, right? They're so interwoven as kind of moral issues, but yet I think it is the white evangelicals who have constructed a political playbook in which it keeps it prominent, and it's working against their larger moral goals, right? If you're against abortion, which I think most Americans are. It's not a debate over, most Americans, I think abortion is a no one wants to have an abortion, I think, is the idea. Very few people do. It's a question of, the rights of the woman and so forth. That's,
Well, I'm grateful that Nichole brought up Bernie Sanders, and I think, calls attention to the fact that he would have been, the first self-avowed, whatever he calls himself, agnostic atheist, to run for office.
Who's married to a Catholic.
Right. Yeah. Color me skeptical, though. I mean, the polls, the surveys show that, Americans will vote for, at least say vast majority of Americans say they will vote for a Jewish person for president. They'll even vote for a Muslim person for president. But I still think it's less than the majority of people say that they would vote for an atheist for president. And just anecdotally, I mean, I was down doing research in rural Georgia last year, and I talked to a school principal. And so he started off the conversation by saying that atheists are taking over the country. Then a couple of minutes later, I asked him, are there any atheists teaching in your school district? And he said no. So they're taking over the country secretly, right? There's obviously, atheists are both a target And also, there's a threat of discrimination coming from them. But that could be changing a lot quicker than we think, right? I mean, the numbers with the religious affiliated are religiously unaffiliated, these NONES, and Nichole talks about, are just startling. I mean, 40% of Americans under the age of 30 describe themselves as religiously unaffiliated, and it's just much larger than evangelicals. And I've been teaching, again, like Nichole, I'm older than I wish I was, and I've been teaching religion and politics for the last 20 years. And big issue is the secularization thesis, right? And the secularization thesis says that as countries grow more affluent and they grow more modernized, that the percentage of people who are strongly religious will decrease. And that operated in Western Europe, has operated in Western Europe perfectly. The U.S. has always been the outlier there, right? The U.S. is, the most affluent country in the world, and arguably the most modern country in the world, and yet we had, strong, robust religious attendance. But the question was always to figure out, why is that changing? And I think that the strong possibility for the future is that we are going to be like Western Europe. That it's just that we were sort of late to the party. And to go back to what John was talking about, I find it really interesting that when Barack Obama ran in 2008, he felt that he needed to make a strong outreach to evangelicals, right? I mean, so he went to Rick Warren in Saddleback Church, and he had Rick Warren give his invocation in the 2008 nomination. And, Biden, he had an evangelical outreach coordinator and things like that. Biden hasn't done that. And I wonder whether that's partly because he just doesn't feel that he needs to do it. These folks are either voting, clearly in the back for Republicans or for Trump, or they're just not as important as they used to be.
Although the coordinator for Believers for Biden is an evangelical, Joshua Dixon, yes, but he's coordinating kind of all of the groups, and I think evangelical outreach is one dimension of his work.
I think if you compare Biden to Hillary in 2016, Biden's doing much more. I think Hillary Clinton, it's her people, right, have even admitted this, that they thought they could win without white evangelicals. And in some ways they were right. They won by 3 million votes, right? So it kind of worked, right? But not enough to win the Electoral College. But I think they ignored white evangelicals, even like Bill, who would didn't have high numbers among evangelicals, Bill Clinton, but at least he talked about faith, and he could, talked about abortion being rare, legal, and safe. I think
yes.
Safe, rare, and legal. Yeah.
He talked about faith, especially when he got caught cheating, right? That was
yeah, right. And Biden has done a little bit more, I think, but certainly not as much as Obama. So you talk about Rick Warren's church. In 1 week before the Pennsylvania primary in 2008, the Pennsylvania primary was late, and Hillary and Obama were still duking it out, right, for the nomination. Both came to my institution, Messiah College. CNN covered it. I don't know if you remember that event, Emile, but I watched 18 to 22-year-old evangelical Christians in the audience when Barack Obama came out, and he was a rock star. That place erupted, right? While the older, visitors from the community, here in conservative, red state Pennsylvania, kind of, sat there like this. The kids were going nuts, and both Obama and Hillary that night were very articulate about faith. Right? Hillary was drawing deeply upon her Methodist upbringing and so forth. I didn't hear that in 2016. And I'm wondering if that cost her a few thousand votes in Michigan, Wisconsin, right? Pennsylvania. And I think Biden doesn't want to make the same mistake. Right? Although he's certainly not, I wish Biden would say more about what I said before. I wish Biden would talk about, I don't want to overturn Roe versus Wade. I don't want to, I want to protect women's rights and their reproductive rights. But let's try to figure out how my positions on, attacking systemic racism or poverty might reduce the number of abortions. That's all he has to say. And those people who hate Trump but can't bring themselves to vote for Biden would go with Biden, within the white evangelical community. It's not hard.
Well, it's fascinating. I don't know how many of you listen to the New York Times, The Daily podcast. They have these fantastic reports from the field where they've done a number of things, one on former convicts in Florida and how they're learning, to vote now that, many can, and what
I saw that today. Yeah.
But one that really captured my attention was a recent one on suburban white women in Ohio, some of whom either voted for Donald Trump or Gary Johnson as a third-party option in 2016 rather than Hillary Clinton, but who now support Barack Obama and were kind of Barack Obama, Joe Biden. You can tell what my generation is. Barack Obama is, the president in my mind. When I get tired, Barack Obama is the first name that.
I wish he was president after watching his speech the other day. That was incredible.
He has a gift, that's for sure.
Come back, please.
But some of the reasons that the women gave, they were. I encourage you all to go find this podcast. I've been obsessed with it. And honestly, again, as a suburban woman, who's been really attentive to the messaging that's been disseminated towards suburban women. But these women saying, one in particular said, when Hillary Clinton came out and very forthrightly defended what she heard was a defense of late-term abortion. And she said, I just couldn't. I voted for Gary Johnson, or maybe this particular woman voted for Donald Trump. But there was a real that was a real sticking point. But when they were interviewed, again, these journalists did a fantastic job with this story, because these women are now, supporting Biden. They're in a full-throated manner. Their fingers aren't crossed behind their backs. And when asked about abortion, several of them have actually changed their own views. And they asked if Biden changed them or if they just changed. And some of them say, things just might, it's not that the candidate was much better, it's that I've changed, right? That after seeing the cost of voting in this way, my view about abortion has shifted. Maybe not that it's, now completely right, but the view of particular women in particular situations, or more of an awareness of the medical realities of the procedure, rather than it's become this culture war thing. But in terms of the medicine, I teach a little bit of bioethics. It's a lot more nuanced than just abortion, yes or no. And that comes into, that ought to be more fully considered in thinking about the issue of abortion. It's not just a black and white issue, even when it comes to the medicine. And these women have really done the work to educate themselves about a lot of issues, but the top of the agenda was racism and abortion as white women in the suburbs of Ohio. So I think that's really telling for the direction of a lot of things, honestly. But that there, John, I think you're right that at least in the work that I've done with Catholics, and now looking at suburban women who are Christian, that there is a lot of remaining, even if just from one's upbringing, discomfort with abortion policies that are too progressive.
Yeah.
But I wonder, again, I don't want to be too wooey and say, oh, we're in the middle of a realignment, because we might be, we might not be. I don't want to jump too far ahead of where we are. But if we are, I'm curious where people are going to line up on this question, even if it's just a small readjustment of, suburban women voting more democratically than they had in the past, or possibly Latinos voting more conservatively than we have, at least outside of South Florida, than we have in the past, and where abortion will play into any possible let's just call it a readjustment rather than a realignment for right now.
And I think Donald Trump, when we look back as historians at Donald Trump's presidency, there's going to be a lot of different kind of nuances, right? I think the very fact of Donald Trump's presidency and everything that's kind of been wrong with it, right, is forcing people like you're talking about like, we hate this guy and we need to really do our homework to figure out what we really believe about this, and not just toe the party line, abortion's bad, right? Well, that means I'm going to have to support Donald Trump. Again, it's not the best way of doing politics, right? You don't let your biases affect your scientific, but I think it's happened in a lot of cases, right? Like, I need to come up with a legitimate case why, overturning Roe versus Wade is not the be all end all here on abortion.
If I could just register a slight dissenting note here, I don't want to, certainly don't want to underestimate the importance of abortion politics particularly for evangelicals. But at the same time, I mean, John, you had mentioned that historically, the issue which forced evangelicals into the public arena was not abortion back in the 1970s, right? It was, these private schools that were in the South, especially, that were losing their right to segregate. So it was race. And, if we look at Robert Jones's recent book, White Too Long, the relationship between white evangelicalism and Jones uses the words, so I'll use it, racist policies, that 80% of white evangelicals see Confederate flags as symbol of Southern pride and not as racism. 80% of evangelicals support a Southern border wall. Vast majorities of evangelicals think that structural racism, and whether it's law enforcement or economics, is not an issue. And these are disturbing numbers, and it just makes me wonder how persuadable many white evangelicals are. I mean, if Biden took a more moderate position on abortion, maybe feel free to push back, of course, maybe that would make a difference. But the way that I read it and the way that Robert Jones reads it is that it's really the policies on race that is driving white evangelical support for Trump and the Republicans.
Let me just quickly respond to that, because I don't deny anything that you're saying, right? But let me talk about what I see on the ground and what I see as a kind of overly obsessive viewer of evangelical social media, right? It's scholarly work, right? I try to understand them. I think a lot of people were disillusioned with Donald Trump, the way he handled. A lot of white evangelicals were disillusioned with this summer, the way Donald Trump handled the race. A lot of them were exposed to the idea of systemic racism for the first time, and they said, "Oh, that makes sense." Now, the more vocal ones were not, right? You have someone like Al Mohler, who is this spokesperson for evangelicals. He's the president of the Southern Baptist Seminary in Louisville, the largest evangelical seminary in the world, right? Who came out and said systemic racism is real this summer, which was huge, right? For a Southern Baptist to say, right? He just, but he's voting for Trump because of abortion. What worries me, I'll put my political cards on the table here, as someone who's in Pennsylvania, and I get, 500 little campaign things in my mailbox every day and have to sort through it all because we're in this important swing state. I talk to people, I get nervous as a Biden supporter who wants Trump out. And you students can yell at me if you're pro-Trumpers. We can have that debate in the Q&A, right? But I'll just put my political cards on the table. I worry because I am talking to more and more evangelicals who were with me and with anti-Trump in the summer, or even with COVID, right? This guy we got to get rid of him or whatever. Now suddenly they're reading like Robert George from Princeton, this conservative intellectual writing in the National Review about abortion. It's the most important thing. They're looking for these ethicists in their traditions who are telling them that abortion is the most important thing. And they're getting cold feet. And they're saying, I just can't do it because of abortion. So again, that's not Bob Jones. I mean, Robert Jones. That's not scientific data. I'm just telling you what I'm feeling and what's making me nervous a little bit right now. Especially here in Pennsylvania, because they are falling back on this old political playbook, right? So
here, John, just to kind of maybe reorient our conversation a little bit around kind of the way in which discursive politics are being tied into religious discourse, right? And how discursive politics, like a cultural war topic such as abortion or even systemic racism, right, can really be activated at key times to influence, right? And so that's what's so fascinating to me as I kind of watch these headlines unfold in these last weeks, right, when everything's getting ramped up to like 110, right? Because, you vote or you die kind of mentality, right?
Democracy will end if Trump doesn't get elected.
But the way in which religion is being infused into that, and it's not just religion, it's Christianity, like, right? That's been kind of the underlying religious tradition of this conversation, and we can't get away from, even if we want to include other religious voices in this conversation. It's really hard to do when we're talking about American politics, right? And I think you both are pointing out, and Emile is kind of pushing us in that direction of the ways in which these conversations are being kind of propagated. They're being used as ammunition to motivate turnout, right?
Well, and I would like to take kind of a both and position through here, that yes, abortion is this, it's this thing that's being called out every time I write something in social media that, explores another issue within Catholicism or another moral issue.
But abortion.
What about abortion? Yes. But also I think that, actually I have Robert Jones' book sitting on my desk on the other side of this wall, ready to be read, but I've not had a moment because I have a toddler who demands that I reread the same I'm a Bunny book, 50 times. But this ability to leverage these symbols, I think, is really tied to the relationship between white supremacy and Christianity in the history of the country. So and that's why it's a very delicate situation when I start hearing reading think pieces or hearing podcasts talking about the coming emergence of conservative Latinos, because I'm positive that there are, especially among Latino men, I think Trump's going to do better if the polls are indicative. He'll do better with Latino men than and with Black men than he has in the past, at least in 2016. Just for a little bit of my own backstory. So my own father, he's a welder. He's like, I'm like Tim Kaine. We both have welders for fathers. And, he's a second generation Catholic Mexican-American man who grew up in rural Nebraska. And in his very first election, he voted for Ronald Reagan because that's who everybody in Nebraska was voting for. He didn't even know that there was another guy to vote for, right? Like everybody was voting for Reagan. And he's very Catholic, very socially conservative. And I've often, and he's also experienced tremendous amounts of racism and discrimination in his life. And I've talked to him at length on a number of occasions. Dad, why aren't you a Republican? You abhor abortion. You're very conservative, just on a basic level. And he's like, I can't, this party stands against my interests as a non-white person. I can't vote Republican. It would be voting against myself. And that's where I think where you're pushing us, Emile, to complicate this view of the role of abortion in all of this equation. I don't have a good way to describe in a very precise manner the links between abortion and whiteness, but there's something going on there that I think even, non-white people who oppose abortion on moral grounds aren't necessarily going to hear it as the same dog whistle as white Christians in terms of voting. Not exclusively. I clearly there are Latino Christians who will hear it that way, but I think it's a different issue when we take the racial slice of.
I think we're talking about two different things here. I'm talking about sort of the way white evangelicals, what's gonna change their mind at the last minute, right? And I think Emile and Nichole, you're talking about kind of taking an outside kind of scholarly perspective on this, what's really motivating you, right? As opposed to what I'm talking about, what they're actually saying, right? It's abortion. They don't understand the way it's deeply embedded with, I think you're right, with race and so forth. I think you could say the same thing about your father, about the African-American community. From, I haven't looked at statistics in a while, but they're largely, the majority are pro-life on abortion, right? And traditional marriage, if I'm not mistaken. But yet they would, most of them are not going to vote for a Republican, right? It's the same type thing at work.
Well, John, this is
remind folks that they can put questions in the chat box. So we should be moving towards, as we're inching towards 8:30. So I want to make sure that our viewers have an opportunity to insert their questions as well. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, John, I mean, this is just an anecdotal example, but, again, in my research in Georgia, and I wasn't looking for this. So I attended a meeting with a Georgia school superintendent who is also a Baptist minister. So incredibly hardworking guy, obviously, right? I mean, he's not busy enough being a school superintendent, but he's a minister on Southern Baptist minister on the side. And the issue of clubs in schools came up. And so, so somebody raised the question of, can you have, a Satanist club in a school, right? And this superintendent spontaneously brought up, he said, we've been having the same issue with Black Lives Matters clubs in our school. So putting Black Lives Matters clubs and Satanist clubs into the same basket. This was 2 years ago. So I've had, I know you've had your conversations, and John, your outreach to evangelicals is far greater than mine. But there are conversations that I've had suggested anecdotally. I mean, abortion is. I don't want to say. I certainly don't want to say it's not sincere.
I think we're talking about the different sides of the same coin in some ways. Maybe we're not, but yeah.
The other thing which I would just bring up, which I think is really important for this election, to be honest, and you folks can push back against me. There is research associating religious fundamentalism with right-wing authoritarianism. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One reason is, especially for Christians, is belief in premillennialism, belief in literalism, belief in the devil. These are all correlated with right-wing authoritarianism. And given that the Republican Party is trending towards becoming a white nationalist and increasingly authoritarian, party, I think it's something that we as Americans really need to think about, that there's this connection between the fact that, the Republican Party is going in the direction it is, and the primary base in that party are white evangelical Christians.
Yeah, I think you see this a lot with rhetoric from some of the leading Christian leaders, people like Franklin Graham and so forth. I definitely agree with that. I know they start talking about, I picked this up a while ago at watching kind of these guys, they're mostly guys, except for maybe Paula White and a few others, right? But watching these guys sort of saying things like, there are forces at work within the Democratic Party who are trying to, right? Anyone who grew up sort of evangelical or is familiar with the evangelical culture, what he's kind of talking about, right? There are these forces, right? These it's appealing to this kind of evangelical, kind of language without really coming out and saying that. Some have come out and saying, like Robert Jeffress at First Baptist Dallas and others are saying, the Democratic Party is the party of Satan, or the Democrat, it's evil, and but others are much more subtle, right? They're playing this language. It's like when Mike Pence every day after the after the coronavirus hearings back in April and March would say, like, we're gonna get the doctors, masks, and so forth, and we're gonna, quote, heal this land, he would always end. I mean, that's just a buzzword. It's 2 Chronicles 7:14, right? If my people will, I mean, some of these leaders are masters at playing upon these, I'm getting off track now, but these kind of evangelical metaphors,
Yeah.
Okay, we do have some questions from the audience, and since we're running out of time here, I do want to turn to those. So we've got a question from Andrew Sharp to start us off here. It's related to discussion of the courts. It says he's curious of the panel's thoughts on whether abortion may be the less salient issue now that Trump has appointed more 25% of all active U.S. federal judges, and of course ACP to the Supreme Court. Is that success enough to maybe push other issues to the forefront for Christian Republicans? Like, are we able to move past now that the court seems to be stacked?
I don't think so. In part because all of those facts that you state are facts. They're true. I think that the degree of the religious and cultural symbolism, the amount of bandwidth it occupies in the political thinking of Christians in the United States, at least Catholics and evangelicals, in different ways. We haven't talked a lot about the Christian mainline, but in different ways among mainliners who have, in some cases, stark disagreements even within a church, one particular church or denomination on the issue. But I do think that at least if, again, we don't have the data yet, but just in my perception of, interactions on social media, we're all socially distanced right now. So I'm not, getting these in person from people in most cases, but it remains something, there's a fear that Joe Biden will try to codify Roe versus Wade. Actually, he's signaled that himself. I'm not sure this is a fear so much as, he said, yeah, we should make this a law so we stop, going to war over, justice appointments, at least on this particular issue. So I think that it will continue to motivate. And then, a really interesting phenomenon of this particular election is that, more than a third of expected votes have already been cast. So some of those have been cast with the hope of, if something had gone wrong, with the issues of abortion kind of still as they were before Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, may her memory be a blessing. That I voted before that happened. So, I think, this particular election is going to be fascinating in terms of looking at various slices and when people voted and how and what issue, what was the news at that time. Like, my vote doesn't account for Donald Trump getting COVID. But that's my initial answer. Thank you for your great question.
That is a great question, Dylan. Yeah, real quick, some guy asked a question. Is this Dylan or Andrew? Andrew. Who am I responding to? Andrew. Yeah. This is to me. There was a after the second debate, CNN had one of these undecided groups. That what did they think? And there was this like doggedly pro-life young man, who floated this exact same thing out. I'm totally am pro-life, and that's why I'm voting for Biden, because we got our 3 Supreme Court justices. And like the panelists on like Jake Tapper and all these guys, it was like, like, we've never heard this before. What is this? I've never heard this argument, right? But I think the Christian right is about power, right? It's about holding and controlling the levers of power. And power, I'm an 18th century historian who studies the American Revolution, right? The founding fathers said power is kind of this encroaching thing. You want more and more of it, right? So, I'm not expecting them to kind of let up on the pedal now, right? Because they got 3 Supreme Court justices. I'd be surprised. Yeah, I agree with Nichole.
Can I combine the last 2 questions there? Maybe that will help us kind of close up some of these conversations. Sorry, interrupt here. I just want to make sure that there seems to be this kind of underlining question about how is it chicken or egg? You know, like, do politicians have a religious kind of tradition that they gravitate towards initially, or is it the issue then that's going to kind of pull them towards a specific religious tradition? And I think that's kind of a fascinating one that maybe our panelists can kind of help us close out with. What comes first? Is it religion or is it politics?
I guess, you know, Donald Trump has kind of, you know, I don't think he's the best model for thinking about this question, right? You know, I think he could care less about his evangelical base. I mean, maybe I'm being too unfair to him. I think, you know, he's used them very well and played them very well. So, I mean, I don't. But yeah, maybe someone else could take that. Yeah.
So Jennifer, I think it's a great question. I think it depends on the election. I actually don't think that this is a religion and culture election 2020. Religion tends to be more of a back burner issue when it comes to electoral politics and presidential politics, to be quite honest. So, you know, in 2000 and in 2004, when the, you know, more so in 2000, when the economy is doing pretty decently, and, you know, and certainly in 2004, we get into the Iraq War, you know, Bush really runs on culture issues, right? Remember, it was, you know, the three G's: God, guns, and gays. You know, this is not a religion election. This is a COVID election. This is an economy election. This is probably a race election, you know, issue of racial injustice election before abortion. You know, but that said, one of just really quickly, one of the interesting things that I think we need to take account of, and I think Nichole did talk about it before, is even though religion is not an issue in these elections, religious groups can still play an incredibly important role. And I'm thinking particularly the role that Black women churchgoers in South Carolina played, you know, in making sure that, you know, because obviously they played an incredibly pivotal role in making sure that Biden was the nominee. That's where he started his comeback, and not Bernie. So if you believe, you know, that, you know, Trump's reelection is truly a threat to America, and that Biden was the one candidate who had the best chance of beating him, then, you know, Black women churchgoers in South Carolina saved America again, you know? And so I think that's important to remember too.
As they do. Yeah, I think, Dylan, it's a fantastic question from my perspective as a Catholic, because I think that there's a lot of discussion amongst ourselves about whether politics has come to polarize the Catholic Church in ways that are, at least from the perspective of a church that's try to hang together, you know, through some through some stuff. It's really scary for a lot of people, and these political positions, you know, more secular political positions, enter into church politics. And, you know, Pope Francis recently released a new encyclical called Fratelli Tutti on it's, you know, on brotherhood, or, you know, brothers and sisters all would be the translation. But reception of that document, which largely deals with economy, solidarity, poverty, politics, he has a large section on politics. Reading of that has been highly polarized in the United States down party lines. So I do think, at least, you know, among Catholics whom I study, there's an argument to be made that the parties themselves are leavening, or that's the wrong analogy there. Maybe fertilizing the religious expression of particular Catholics in ways that, you know, I'm a hopeful person. I'm an optimistic person, but the situation, at least within the Catholic Church, that a U.S. Catholic Church, that we haven't dealt with, is what that means for how we relate to one another.
Dr. Fea, any last kind of thoughts?
No, I think similar within white evangelicalism. I don't think white evagelicalism is divided to the extent that the Catholics are over this issue. They should be. You know, I think you know, there are clear historical reasons why white evangelicals tend to vote GOP, right? I mean, there's things that have developed over the course of time. This is a historian in me speaking, that are historical, not necessarily good public theology or theological or reasons that are sort of deeply rooted in any kind of belief, religious belief, as much as sort of historical forces that are sort of scaring a lot of white evangelicals in some ways. So but I think white evangelicals are sort of divided between maybe about 20% who are sort of on the left or moderates, and then there's this gap of that 80% that voted for Trump. I think that can be equally split, although this is just me riffing. There's no numbers here, between the kind of evangelicals who believe Trump is like the anointed one, the King Cyrus, the for such a time as this, versus the holding their nose because of abortion or something evangelicals who voted for Trump. So it'll be, this gets back to the point Nichole made. It'll be easy to see how this all breaks out when we get the numbers, like November 8th or whenever we see those numbers. I'm fascinated to see what it all looks like.
Yeah.
Well, we have exhausted our time period here, and this has been a very rich conversation. Why don't we let, I think, Mehdi, you wanted to say something? Mackenzie, can you unmute him? Oh, you're muted, Mehdi, so Mackenzie, you have to unmute him. And then Mackenzie can close us out with her last few kind of remarks. You're still muted.
Okay, I just wanted something very interesting happened today. I have a niece who we come from an Islamic background, and my niece Layla went to a mosque today. There was a death in the family, and she went there for prayers. And she said they brought a whole bunch of bags full of goodies and so on, with a letter attached to it from Donald Trump. He is distributing bags of goodies in mosques, and the letter says something like, I've done more vote for me. I've done more for Muslims than any other president ever. She took pictures of that. I'm going to send that picture to Mackenzie, and she can distribute it.
I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that picture. Yeah, he's done more, probably since Abraham Lincoln, right? He's done more for the Muslims.
Your next blog post.
Their outreach program to Muslims is, I guess, there. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's great.
All right, well, let's turn things over to Mackenzie, but I wanted to say thank you to everyone. This has been a very rich conversation, and I've learned a great deal. This ancient historian has updated some of her knowledge of American history.
Thank you, Jennifer, for the great questions.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you again for everyone who joined us this evening for our little conversation beyond the ballot. It was presented by the Khatib program. So again, we want to extend our thank you to our benefactors, Dr. and Mrs. Khatib. For more information about our program, you can go to the website, but what we can also do is maybe circulate some of these questions in a follow-up email to some of our panelists. If they'd like to kind of type something up, we can always share that on our website. And our hope is to get this evening's conversation uploaded to our website so people can kind of come back and reference. Of course, it would be up to the panelists themselves, but their affiliations and their universities and where they're from. I'm sure they would be willing to kind of hear some of your ideas or respond to some of your emails, more questions, kind of keep the conversation going. So again, a huge thank you to everyone who joined us tonight, and especially to our esteemed panelists, to Dr. Nichole Flores, to Dr. John Fea, our wonderful respondent, Dr. Emile Lester, and our distinguished moderator, Dr. Jennifer Berry. Thank you for stepping in to kind of lead us and guide us. And so thank you also to the audience for your thoughtfulness, those questions that you did give, your participation. You helped to make this event what it was. And so again, visit our website for more information on the program, on interreligious dialogue as kind of this up and coming movement that's really taking foot in the United States, for our upcoming events and programming. And if you have any further questions, feel free to throw them into the chat. I'll stay on for a little bit to kind of monitor that. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and we hope that you have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
bye. Good night. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you for all your work.
Of course, this was a really good conversation.
It was very good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Oh,
all right.
Kat had a question. Oh, go ahead, Kat.
Oh, she's gone. Maybe she can email.
Okay.
I don't know.
All right.
So I'm gonna stop my recording. You recorded as well, Dr. Berry?
Yeah, I did.
You were
Yeah.
able to? Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
I'll send it